Good morning, and welcome to How Are We Here, my little series where we look at how other, usually older cultures, and its people thought we got here. Today, I have an old tale of how the Gnostics, an early sect of Christianity, say we may have all gotten here. As I've spent time searching the interwebs for old stories on the world's creation, I remembered a different tale, a tale I had heard sometime years ago. A story that turns the Genesis tale from the Bible on its head. A story that explains why the world is full of suffering, why the God of the Old Testament is so different from the God of the New Testament. A story that just doesn't tell us how we are here, but why are we here, why the world is full of suffering and evils. A story some consider blasphemy, but a story I quite enjoyed. A story from a couple millennia ago. As always, a few different variations exist, or should I say survived, because we know early church leaders tried to wipe this cult out, and yes, cult had quotation marks around it. What follows is a more in-depth version of Gnosticism. It's more in-depth than I remember hearing, it's more in-depth than I remember learning. The majority of what follows is from the secret Gospel of John, and it lets us know just how we might have all gotten here. Taken from the secret Gospel of John. In the beginning, there is only the One, the Father, who is. Illimitable, since there is nothing before it to limit it. Unfathomable, since there is nothing before it to fathom it. Immeasurable, since there was nothing before it to measure it. Invisible, since nothing has seen it. Eternal, since it exists eternally. Unutterable, since nothing could comprehend it to utter it. And unnameable, since there is nothing before it to give it a name. The Father, sometimes called Monad, it was in the telling I was familiar with, was surrounded by a luminous spiritual water. Maybe he was the pool. As he gazed into this water, he would see his reflection. The reflection then became Barbello, or the mother, his female counterpart. She was also called Forethought, because she was, his first thought. The mother would ask the father to be granted foreknowledge, and as well as incorruptibility, life eternal, and the truth. He would grant these eons, and these things, eons, would come into being, a part of them, and he glorified by them. The father would then gaze into Barbello, and she would conceive of him. She would give birth to a spark of light, very, very similar to the father's light. He was called the Son. He was called autogenous. Not quite sure what that means. He was self-generated, since he was identical with the Father. He was further called Christ, a name greater than any other name. The Father, he would anoint his Son with his goodness. This would pass the Father's perfect goodness onto his Son, so the Son would glorify his mother and father. So the Son, like the mother, would ask to be given the eons the Father had granted his mother. And of course, the father and mother agreed. Mind would arise, and it too glorified its father and mother. Mind would have its own ideas, I guess, and wanted to bring something else forth through the father. So will was born, followed closely by the word. The father would make the Son master of all power and truth. From the Son came four luminaries, and each luminary brought forth three eons. Only one of these are really important for the story, but I'll list the eons just so you know their names and what they were. Grace, truth, and form came with the luminary Harmazel. Insight, perception, and memory came with Uriel. Understanding, love, and idea with Devathai. And finally, the three with Elalath were perfection, peace, and wisdom. Wisdom was also known as Sophia. This will be important later on. Trust me, my dear viewers. So I'm not sure what exactly a luminary is. It's maybe the same as an eon, but it also seems to be a place. So if you are confused, take heart that so am I. But for our purposes, let's assume eons are the beings of the fullness, divine beings like angels and even the Trinity, and maybe represent levels of heaven too. Sorry, folks, That's all I got on that. But the next part of creation has to do with the perfect human. This was called Pigranmus, aka Adam the Stranger, or Holy Adam, or Old Adam. This dude came into being and also glorified the Father. He was placed in the Aeon, lowercase a for some reason, of Harmazel. Adam had a son, Seth. Sound a tad familiar? Well, hold on to your seats. Seth was then placed in the Aeon of Oriel and was to preside over the souls of saints, those with Gnosis, who would dwell in the Aeon of Deiphthi. And a side note, the souls of those who weren't saints, whom didn't have Gnosis, but had repented, eventually got their own place in the Aeon of Elulath. A lot of that probably sounded really wordy. It's the way they wrote way back in the day, I guess. But moving on, we'll go back to Sophia, or wisdom. Wisdom was one of those eons that was birthed I told you would be important. And she watched all of this, watched these marvelous and radiant beings all around her, and a desire would start to rise within her. She wanted to birth her own eon, and she would act on this desire. But she did so impatiently, impulsively. Dum da dum dum dum. You see, she did not involve her divine partner. She did not obtain permission from the Father. But since she had descended from the Father, she too was full of his tremendous power. She gave birth to a new being that did contain some of her divine essences. This being, it didn't resemble the other immortal beings that spurned its creation. It was hideous and misshapen, a description of a snake with a lion's head, whose eyes burned like lightning. That would be an apt description. It was born like this because Sophia she conceived it alone, and in fear and shame Sophia would cast out her son from the divine realm. This realm, I called it earlier as the fullness, was also called the pleroma. Not sure if I mentioned that. She did this in hope that none of the other inhabitants of the fullness, the pleroma, this perfect realm, would see him. Yep, definitely done out of shame and guilt. And to further conceal her son, she enveloped him in a shining cloud and placed him on a throne which was in the middle of it. Sophia would name her son. We will use the name Yaldabaoth, which is said to maybe mean child of chaos. He has also been called Sakla, which means fool, and also Samael, which means blind god. He was also called the Demiurge in the tale I had heard years ago. And Yaldabaoth, not knowing of his origins, some tellings say he thought he was all there was, the one I heard did, would then mate with the mindlessness within himself. Just a slightly icky way of saying he generated 12 Archons. Okay, so the Archons in Gnosticism were malevolent beings which controlled the earth as well as many of the thoughts, feelings, and actions of humans. One Gnostic test called the reality of rulers say that they all had bodies that were both male and female, and their faces were those of beasts. So they weren't truly male or female, and they definitely weren't human nor animal. Archon is also Greek for rulers. So these 12 demonic beings would shortly start ruling over the earth from the celestial spheres above it. The Demiurge, or Yaldabaoth, which is the name I'll use going forward, is also said to have created the earth we find ourselves on today. And because of Yaldabaoth's foolishness, he was wicked. He was ignorant of his ancestry. He belligerently claimed, "I am God. There is no other God beside me." His 12 archons would generate new archons, till there were 365 of them, one to rule over every day of the year. Yaldabaoth, due to being Sophia's son, he had a model of the pleroma within himself, so he would create the material world based off of that. But it came out all wrong. It was corrupted. This was due to his ignorance and depravity. His creation, it was but a mere pale imitation of the divine model. Sophia, she watched all of this. She felt so guilty. She would weep for what she had did. After all, she was the one who decided to give birth to such a monstrous entity. In her pleas for repension, is repension even a word? Anywho, the Father, full of his perfect love, heard her pleas and promised to forgive. He promised to forgive her and restore her to her former stature. There was a condition, though. Sophia had to reside in the ninth heaven, the layer of the sky that was closest to the Pleroma. It was above Yaldabaoth and his seven Archon-populated heavens that resided below him. She would need to stay there until she atoned for her sin and mended her deficiency. So let's pop back to the creation of the material world. So in the meantime, Yaldabaoth and his Archons had an image of the heavenly Adam, the one that resided in the Father's pristine realm we talked about earlier. They didn't know where this vision came from, but it intrigued them. They were enthralled by it, so they decided to create it. The Archons watched as Yaldabaoth formed this Adam. It laid lifeless on the ground. They did not know how to animate it. They couldn't figure out how to animate it, get it to move, bring it to life. Like a bunch of goons, they stood around the immobile body. But beings from the Pleroma would come up with a plan. You see, a part of Sophia, wisdom, was trapped within Yaldabaoth. This spark of power needed to be returned to her before she could return to the fullness of the Pleroma. Somehow, these emissaries of the Pleroma appeared to Yaldabaoth and gave him the idea to breathe life into Adam's face. Convinced Yaldabaoth, he at once did this. And when Yaldabaoth breathed the breath of life into Adam, that part of Sophia's power would flutter out of him and into Adam, bringing the first man to life. Having a piece of Sophia within him, Adam was naturally wiser, more spiritual, and more intelligent than his creator God. The Archons were jealous. They resented how much better Adam was than them, so they made him mortal. He was placed in the Garden of Eden, which was filled with tasty and tempting foods. This was done to make him attached to the material pleasures and distract him from his true nature, his divine nature. Greedily, they wanted to possess Adam's divine insight. They wanted to be more than they were, so they took it out on Adam and created a new being to house the divine spark. They created Eve, and they removed that spark and placed it within Eve. And when Adam laid eyes on Eve, he instantly he instantly knew that Eve was his spiritual counterpart, and a being from the fullness would urge Eve and Adam to eat from the tree of Gnosis, or as we know it, the tree of knowledge. It would help them grow their understanding of what they were, and would then know their superiority over all other creatures. This being, he was the Son, the Christ, who urged them to eat the fruit from the tree. I bet you're thinking it was Satan or Lucifer. Well, in some versions, it was Lucifer, the light bringer, who brought this light of knowledge to Adam and Eve in the garden, hence why the evil creator god hates Lucifer. Yaldabaoth, the creator god, the Demiurge, was furious. He was boiling over with hate and envy, so he defiled Eve, then casted her and her mate out from the garden, banished them from eating of the tree. Two sons were born from that horrible act. These sons were called Cain and Abel, also known as Yahweh and Elohim, both names used by God in the Old Testament. Adam and Eve, though, they would have a loving relationship, and eventually they would have a son of their own, an enlightened boy named Seth, and he too was named after the son of the heavenly Adam. Of course, what God could stand someone in his creation who is more enlightened and superior to them? So Yaldabaoth would force all three of them to drink the water of forgetfulness. This caused them to lose their gnosis, their knowledge of who and what they were. But Yaldabaoth, the god of the Old Testament, wasn't powerful enough to expunge all the gnosis from the first family. So within humankind, there lies the capacity, the ability to revive that dormant gnosis. All these spiritual descendants need to do to regain their saving illumination, to reignite their divine spark, is to have it revealed to them, revealed by a Savior, the Christ, just as he did for the ancestors of humankind. Alrighty, so we got wrap-up time again. First, as always, I apologize for any mispronunciations or any differences in this version if you had heard a different one. Anywho, like I said towards the beginning, I heard a slightly different version a long time ago. Some versions have Monad, or the Father, states he is so above the realm that the evil Old Testament God created, he had to send emissaries of his power to interact with the material world, like Lucifer going to the garden to tempt Eve with the fruit of the tree of knowledge. Like Christ, his son, would eventually be created to bring his divine spark to mankind, whom had been kept in the dark by the Demiurge. I like how the Gnostic story tries to reconcile the sudden personality shift that God, or Yahweh, takes from the Old Testament and the New Testament. I know it's not the only explanation for the shift in behavior, but this is still a neat one that I enjoyed all the same. And I hope you enjoyed it too. That would mean a lot to me. And now you also have Gnosis, knowledge, of Gnosticism, early Christian sects. Imagine how different society could have been if these were the books that the early church put together instead of the ones they picked to make up the Bible. How different would we view the suffering of the material world? How different the phrase, it's God's plan, takes when God Himself acts like a petulant child. Anywho, I still hope you enjoyed this old, relatively unknown maybe, explanation of how we are all here. Hey there, just 1 or 2 more minutes, so please stick around till the end. Thank you so much, once again, for clicking on this video. I hope I did it justice. I hope you enjoyed it. Remember to check out other creation stories in this series, or just find the playlist on the end card and sit back and enjoy a whole bunch of them. Also, check out some of the other topics I have. I have tales from someone else that are just telling old stories, and hopefully soon I'll have an off-topic, odd-tangent video that is just me rambling about something I find interesting. And finally, please do the whole YouTube's thing. Subscribe, share, comment, and like the video. It's a couple seconds for you, but it really brightens my day. I often wonder how many of you viewers are actually hearing and maybe even enjoying these tales. I thank you if you are. Any engagement that you are willing to do may help me make this channel more popular. As always, I appreciate the view. If you enjoyed hearing this video and what could be the reason we are all here, then maybe, just maybe, you're like hearing other creation stories. I have a few other tales of how other cultures thought we got here on the channel. You should see the last video in the series over there. And I'll pop up the How Are We Here playlist over here. Take a view. TLDR, I'm just some guy on the YouTube who did some reading on an interesting topic and shared it the best I could. Thank you all again. Please subscribe, and as always, take care, keep safe.